He snatched the cane right out of her hand. Staff Sergeant Marcus Riker, 6'2", 230 pounds of decorated combat veteran, grabbed it like it was a prop in a joke. He held it up over his head while 11 other men laughed. Lena Cross stood there, 22 years old, both feet planted, staring at him with eyes that didn't blink. She didn't ask for it back. If you've ever been told you're too small, too young, or too broken to matter, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with us until the very end. You will not regret it, the morning they decided she was nothing. The base smells like diesel fuel and old rain. Fort Calloway sat in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the wind never stopped and the sky never quite got bright enough to feel like morning. It was 5:58 a.m. when Lena Cross walked through the east gate of Training Compound 7, and the 12 men waiting inside had already decided without a single word from her that this was going to be the easiest assignment of their careers. Lena was 5'4", 131 pounds. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no makeup, nothing that would give anyone a reason to look twice. Her left knee had a brace on it, the kind with the thick Velcro straps that made a sound when she walked, a soft mechanical whisper that followed her everywhere. Beside her, moving in perfect step, was Rex. Rex was a Belgian Malinois, 78 pounds of muscle and discipline, with a scar that ran from his left ear down through his jaw, where shrapnel had kissed him 2 years ago in a country nobody talked about anymore. He wore a gray tactical vest with a patch on the side that said, "Service K9, do not pet." His amber eyes moved constantly, cataloging the room, the men, the exits, the threats. The 12 men were already seated in the open-air briefing structure when Lena walked in, if you could call it seated. 3 of them were standing. 2 were leaning against support beams with their arms crossed. One, a man named Corporal Danny Voss, was openly on his phone. These were not fresh recruits. These were men who had seen actual combat, men with ribbons on their chests and scars on their hands, men who had been reassigned here for various reasons that their files described in careful bureaucratic language. But that mostly came down to one thing: they didn't take orders, well, from people they didn't respect. They had been told their new instructor would be arriving at 0600. They had not been told she would be 22 years old. They had not been told about the knee brace. They had absolutely not been told about the dog. Lena stopped at the front of the briefing area and set a single folder down on the metal table. She didn't open it. She didn't look at it. She looked at the 12 men instead, one face at a time, slowly, the way you look at something you're trying to memorize. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. Then Corporal Voss looked up from his phone, glanced at her, glanced at Rex, and said very clearly to the man beside him, "You're kidding me." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, which was exactly what he intended. Lena's eyes moved to him. She didn't speak. "No, seriously." Voss continued, sitting up now, warming to his audience. "This is a joke, right? They sent us a kid and her emotional support animal." 3 men laughed, not polite chuckles, real open laughter. The kind that's designed to land, designed to sting, designed to tell someone exactly where they stand. Rex's ears moved, just slightly, his gaze locked on Voss. Lena said nothing. She let the laughter run out on its own, the way you let a wave exhaust itself against a shore. When the room settled back into that particular flavor of silence that comes after men realize the person they're laughing at hasn't moved, hasn't flinched, and isn't going to, that's when Staff Sergeant Marcus Riker stood up. Riker was the one you'd notice first in any room. Not because he was the loudest, but because he carried himself like a man who had never once in his adult life been told no by someone he respected. He was 31 years old, 3 combat deployments, a commendation for valor that he never talked about, and 2 disciplinary transfers that his file explained, with phrases like failure to integrate with command structure, which was officer language for the same thing it always was. He decided he knew better than the people above him, and he made sure everyone around him knew it too. He walked to the front of the room, not toward Lena exactly, more like past her, like she was furniture. He picked up her folder from the table, flipped it open, read something inside, and then closed it again. Set it back down, looked at the other men. "Staff Sergeant Cross," he said, reading from memory. "Age 22, graduated top of her class at Advanced Combat Instructor School." He paused. Let that sit for a moment. Book learning. Some of the men nodded. 2 years field-adjacent assignment, he continued. Stateside. He said that last word with a very specific inflection. And one, he looked down at Rex, medically approved service animal he made a show of trying to remember. What was it? A tibial fracture complication. Ligament reconstruction, Lena said. It was the first thing she'd said since walking in. Her voice was quiet. Not soft, there's a difference. Soft means uncertain. Quiet means controlled. Hers was the voice of someone who had decided a long time ago that volume was for people who needed the room's attention. She didn't need it. She already had it. Riker turned to look at her fully for the first time. He was sizing her up the way men like him do, looking for the thing that explains why someone is in a position they appear too small for. Looking for the political connection, the family name, the favor someone owed someone. Ligament reconstruction, he repeated. So the dog is for balance assist acute stress response, monitoring, and tactical support, Lena said, in that order. Riker smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Tactical support, he said. The dog does tactical support. Correct. He looked back at the men. The smile widened, and then smoothly, without a moment's hesitation, like he'd been planning it since she walked in, he reached over and took the cane that was leaning against the table beside her folder. Her backup cane. The one she carried but rarely used because she'd learned to move without it, because she'd spent 8 months after her surgery teaching herself to walk in a way that didn't announce her damage to everyone in the room. He picked it up, held it over his head, and 12 men laughed. Lena stood without the cane, without reaching for it, without looking at it. Her eyes stayed on Riker. Rex moved. One step forward, weight shifting to his front legs, the posture that anyone who knew working dogs would recognize immediately as the breath before the bark. Lena's hand came down, one gesture, a flat palm facing backward, and Rex stopped. Held. Riker looked at the dog, then back at Lena. He was testing for something. He was looking to see if she'd get flustered, if she'd raise her voice, if she'd threaten him with regulations. That was what he expected. That was what would have confirmed his assessment of her. She didn't do any of that. She said, "Put it down, Sergeant." Not a request, not sharp, just factual. The way you'd tell someone the door was open. Riker lowered the cane slowly, deliberately, and set it against the far end of the table out of her easy reach. A small act, a calculated one, a move in a game that only he thought they were playing. "Sorry about that," he said. "Not sorry at all." Lena picked up her folder, opened it this time, pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it up. "This is your training schedule for the next 6 weeks," she said. "You'll note that the first item on today's agenda is a fitness baseline assessment. This will be followed by a tactical reasoning evaluation, which will involve a scenario you'll be briefed on in 40 minutes. Before any of that happens, I need every man in this room to understand one thing clearly." She set the paper down. "I am not here to earn your respect," she said. "I am here to evaluate whether any of you is capable of functioning in a high-risk command structure where your life and the lives of others depend on your ability to follow instruction from whoever is best positioned to give it. That is your job, not mine." Silence. A different kind of silence this time. Less amused, more watchful. Corporal Voss cleared his throat. "With respect, ma'am, it's Instructor Cross," she said. "Or instructor, not ma'am." Voss blinked. "With respect, instructor, the issue some of us have is that you don't exactly have the—" He searched for the right word. "The operational background to be running this kind of—" "What kind of background do you have?" she asked. Voss straightened. 3 deployments, forward operating as— "I know your deployments," she said. "I read every file in this room before I got here this morning. I know your deployments, I know your evaluations, I know your reprimands, and I know exactly what each of you did that got you sent here instead of where you wanted to be." She paused. "Do you want me to go through yours specifically, Corporal? Or do you want to let it go and move on?" Voss said nothing. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Not like a scene in a movie where the music swells. It was quieter than that, a small recalibration, 12 men adjusting their internal assessments by a few degrees the way a compass needle settles after you pick it up. It was a man named Torres who spoke next. Hector Torres, age 28. One disciplinary note generally regarded by the others as the most level-headed person in the group. He'd been quiet this whole time watching. What was the one thing, Torres asked? Lena looked at him. You said you needed us to understand one thing, Torres said, before the assessment. What was the one thing? For the first time since she'd walked in, something that might have been the edge of an expression crossed Lena's face. Not quite a smile. Something smaller. Something that said she'd noticed him. Underestimating your opponent, she said, is not a character flaw in a training environment. It is a casualty event in the field. I need every man here to understand that by the end of today, not because I told you, but because you'll have learned it firsthand. Riker crossed his arms. Is that a threat? It's a curriculum objective, she said. Riker held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the other men and said, just loud enough, let's see what the curriculum looks like when it can't run. He said it like a joke. The men around him chuckled, not as enthusiastically as before, but enough. Enough to show they were still with him, still standing on that side of the invisible line. Lena didn't react. She turned to the assessment sheet and began walking through the morning schedule. For the next 20 minutes, she was methodical, precise, and completely ordinary. She went through the schedule this way a professional goes through a meeting agenda. No drama, no performance, no visible reaction to anything the men said or didn't say. When Voss asked a question with a smirk underneath it, she answered the question and ignored the smirk. When a man named Briggs kept shifting in his seat and sighing loudly, she didn't call him out, didn't look at him, just continued. The men didn't know what to do with that. They were used to a certain kind of response to their behavior. They were used to authority figures who got visibly irritated, or who overcorrected and tried too hard, or who quietly seething in a way that eventually came out as punitive scheduling. Lena did none of those things. She was just there, present, unaffected, like a wall that doesn't argue back but also doesn't move. Rex, for his part, sat at her left side and looked at the room with the calm, comprehensive attention of an animal that has been trained to notice everything and react to none of it unless given permission. At exactly 06:42, Lena closed her folder and said, "Fitness assessment begins in 3 minutes. Full gear. Assemble at the east track." The men stood, most of them moving with the deliberate ease of people who are confident they're going to perform well. This was their territory. Physical performance, endurance, strength. This was where they lived. Whatever odd impression this small woman with her dog had made in the last 40 minutes was about to be corrected by the thing they actually knew how to do. Riker was the last to stand. He looked at Lena as he passed her. "You running the track, too?" he asked. It was polite on the surface. Underneath it was every assumption he'd walked in with wrapped up in 5 words. Lena looked up at him. "That's not on today's schedule," she said. He nodded slowly. "Right," he said, and walked out. Lena waited until the room was empty. Then she stood for a moment in the quiet, looking at nothing in particular. Rex moved to her side and pressed his shoulder against her left leg lightly, a familiar gesture, one they had developed over 2 years of working together. It wasn't a cue for her to lean on him. It was something else, something between them that didn't have a technical name in any training manual. She put her hand on his head briefly. Then she picked up her folder and her cane from the far end of the table where Riker had left it and walked out to the track. The fitness assessment took 47 minutes. By the end of it, every man in that group had a different number written next to his name on the evaluation sheet, times distances, scores, and none of them were bad. These were elite soldiers. They had trained for years to perform exactly this kind of test. They came in strong and they finished strong, and every single one of them knew it. What they didn't know was what the scores meant, what was passing, what was failing, what was good enough, and what was being flagged. Lena didn't tell them. She wrote she watched, and she said almost nothing for the entire 47 minutes, except an occasional next rotation. And once, when Voss started showboating on the obstacle section, running unnecessarily fast, making it theatrical, she said quietly, "Speed without judgment is called rushing corporal. Note that." He almost argued. You could see it happen in his face, the flare, the impulse, the words forming. Then he swallowed it and kept moving. Torres finished the course 2 minutes behind the top finishers, but he finished it efficiently without wasted motion, without a single misstep on the technical elements. Lena wrote something in the margin next to his time and didn't explain what. When it was over, the men stood at the edge of the track, breathing hard, the competitive energy starting to settle into something more like curiosity. "What's the pass threshold?" Briggs asked. That's not what the assessment measures, Lena said. Then what does it measure? She looked up from her clipboard. It measures how you think under physical stress. The times matter less than the decisions you made when you were tired. She paused. Two of you made choices in the last 10 minutes of that course that would have gotten someone killed in a real environment. We'll discuss it in debrief. Nobody asked which two. They were all too busy looking at each other trying to figure it out. That was intentional. Lena had known it would be. Uncertainty is a tool the same as confidence. She had studied these 12 men for 3 weeks before this assignment began, their records, their psychological evaluations, their documented behavior patterns under stress. She knew exactly who Riker was and why he led the room and what that cost the men who followed him. She knew which ones were followers by default and which ones were followers by choice. She knew Torres was watching her the same way she was watching them, with a kind of professional attention that suggested he might be the variable she hadn't fully calculated yet. She didn't let any of that show. She walked them to the tactical briefing room for the scenario evaluation, Rex at her side, her notes under her arm, her knee brace whispering its small mechanical rhythm against the morning air. The tactical scenario was a hostage recovery simulation, standard parameters. 2-story structure, 4 rooms, 1 package, the target positioned somewhere inside with 2 hostile actors. The men had 40 minutes to plan, 10 minutes to execute. Lena sat outside the planning area with Rex and let them work. This was the part she was most interested in, not the physical assessment that had told her what she already knew. This was where she would see how they thought, how they communicated, and critically who they actually listened to. Through the door, she could hear Riker taking charge immediately the way he always did. Assertive, directional, moving pieces around the model. His tactical instincts were genuinely good. She could see that even through the wall, through the shape of the voices, through the rhythm of how fast the group settled into his framework. The problem was what happened when Torres offered a different approach. She could hear that too. The alternative entry point, Torres suggested the north window, 2nd floor, which would split the hostile actors' attention before the primary team came through the ground floor. It was a good idea, a better idea than Riker's, probably in terms of minimizing exposure. Riker talked over it, not rudely, not dismissively, just continued. Like the idea had been heard and considered and filed away, and they were moving on. Torres didn't push. He went quiet. Lena wrote something in her notebook. When they executed the scenario, they performed adequately. The package was recovered within the time limit. Both hostile actors, role players from the base professional and committed, were neutralized. The team was functional. It was also slower than it needed to be because Riker's entry point created a bottleneck on the ground floor that cost them 40 seconds and 2 near misses that a real hostile actor would have turned into a different kind of story entirely. In debrief, Lena put the scenario map on the table and asked the room, "What would you change?" Nobody spoke. "Anyone," she said. Voss said maybe the second entry point could have been. Torres suggested it, Riker said, not defensively, almost casually. "I considered it." And Lena said. Riker met her eyes, and I made a command decision. The command decision cost 40 seconds and created 2 exposure vulnerabilities, she said. In a real scenario, that's 2 potential casualties. Walk me through your reasoning. There was a shift in the room. Riker was being challenged specifically in front of the group, and the challenge wasn't emotional. It wasn't about power. It was clinical, technical, and completely impossible to deflect without actually engaging with the question. He engaged with it, slowly. And as he talked through his reasoning, Lena listened and asked follow-up questions, and the thing that none of the other men expected to happen happened. Riker started to actually think about it. He got 3 sentences into his explanation and stopped. "The bottleneck," he said. "Yes," Lena said. He was quiet for a moment. Torres was watching him with an expression that was carefully neutral. Not triumphant, not resentful, just waiting. "The Torres approach reduces the bottleneck," Riker said. Not to Torres, not to Lena. More like to himself working something out. "It does," Lena said. "In this particular structure, configuration, yes." Riker nodded, once. Then he looked at Torres and said, "Next scenario, you take point on entry planning." It was not an apology. It was not an admission of error. It was a man with genuine tactical intelligence doing something that was for him genuinely difficult adjusting. The room absorbed this without comment, but the temperature changed, slightly, invisibly, measurably. Lena moved on to the next item in the debrief. By 1600 hours, the men were tired. Not exhausted, they'd worked harder. But the specific kind of tired you get when you spend a day being mentally engaged in a way you didn't expect to be. When the physical part is familiar, but the thinking part catches you off guard. Riker found Lena outside after dismissal. She was sitting on a concrete barrier at the edge of the compound making notes. Rex was lying beside her, chin on his paws, eyes on Riker as he approached. Riker stopped a few feet away. He looked at Rex. Rex looked at him. "He gonna do something?" Riker asked. "Depends on you, Lena said with looking up. Riker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The cane thing this morning." "What about it?" "That was out of line." He said it flatly. No decoration. The way a man says something he's decided to say and isn't going to elaborate on. Lena looked up at him, studied him for a moment. "I know," she said. Riker nodded. "You want to know why I didn't report it?" she said. Not a question. He looked faintly startled. "Were you going to?" "No," she said. "I need to know how you handle the moment after the mistake. The mistake itself tells me less than I can use." He was quiet for a while. Then, and you handled it," she said. She looked back down at her notes. "Don't be late tomorrow." He stood there another moment like he wasn't sure if he was being dismissed. Then Rex shifted just slightly, not threatening, just present, and Riker took one step back. "What does he do?" Riker asked. "The tactical support. What does that actually mean?" Lena set her pen down. "You'll find out," she said, "when it matters." She went back to her notes. Riker looked at Rex one more time. Rex looked back at him with those steady amber eyes that knew something about the world that most people never get close enough to learn. Then Riker walked away. The evening light was failing across Fort Calloway. The diesel smell had softened into the cooler air. Lena sat with her notes and her dog in the peculiar quiet that follows a first day that went exactly as planned and also nothing at all like expected. Tomorrow they would begin the real work. Tonight she let the quiet be what it was. Rex put his head in her lap. She kept writing. The morning after the first day, nobody was late. That alone said something. Riker arrived at 0550, which was 10 minutes before required. He didn't look at the broken cane still lying in two pieces against the wall near the east entrance. Someone had moved it slightly but not disposed of it, and it sat there like a thing nobody wanted to be the first to touch. Torres arrived 30 seconds behind Riker. Then Voss, then Briggs, then the others in pairs and singles until all 12 were present at 0558, standing in something that wasn't quite formation but was closer to it than anything they'd managed the day before. Lena walked in at 0600 exactly. Rex at her side, new cane in her left hand, identical to the broken one, because she'd had 3 spares in her vehicle, because she had learned a long time ago to plan for the things people think will stop you. She looked at the broken cane on the floor. She didn't look at Riker. She looked at the broken cane, and then she looked at the 12 men, and she said, "Good morning." That was it. Nothing else. She walked to the front of the room and opened her folder and began. The men exchanged glances. Some of them had expected her to address it, to make a statement about yesterday, to assert something. The fact that she didn't, that she simply walked in and continued as if the cane, the laughter, the moment on the ground had been accounted for and filed and moved past, unsettled them in a way they couldn't quite name. Riker's jaw was tight. He was watching her the way you watch something you're trying to read and failing. Torres pulled out his notebook. He was the only one who did. "Today's primary objective," Lena said, "is a direct engagement evaluation. You will be assessed individually and as a unit on close quarters response, adaptive decision-making under physical pressure, and the capacity to neutralize a threat when conventional assumptions about that threat are incorrect." She paused, letting that last phrase sit in the room for a moment. "The evaluation begins in 90 minutes. Before that, I need 12 minutes of your time." Briggs from the back, "For what?" "A demonstration," she said. Nobody asked a demonstration of what. Minute 3. The room they moved to was the kind of space that military installations keep for purposes that don't get written on official schedules. Wide open concrete floor. No furniture, the kind of square footage that exists to give people room to fall down in. Lena stood in the center of it with Rex. The 12 men stood at the perimeter, spread out in a loose arc, and Lena looked at all of them and said, I want every man in this room to understand something about threat assessment before we go into today's evaluation. The most dangerous mistake a trained soldier can make is constructing a threat model based on what an opponent looks like rather than what they can do. Voss shifted his weight. He had the look of a man who was already preparing to be bored. So, Lena continued, I'm going to give you a practical demonstration of that principle. She looked at Riker. Sergeant Riker, come to the center. The room went very quiet. Riker looked at her. He didn't move immediately, not because he was hesitating exactly, but because he was processing the request with the careful attention of a man who has learned that walking into the center of a room when someone asks you to is not always a neutral act. He walked to the center. They stood about 6 feet apart. Lena was roughly a foot shorter than him. Rex sat 8 feet to the left watching. Here's what I need you to understand, Lena said to Riker, but she said it loud enough for the room. Everything you think you know about me from looking at me is a liability. And right now I'm going to show you why. Riker crossed his arms. You're going to show me. Yes. Right now. Yes. He looked at the other men. Something passed over his face, not exactly amusement, not exactly discomfort. All right, he said slowly, show me. She moved. It happened in under 2 seconds, and it happened so fast that 3 men in the room missed the beginning of it entirely. One moment, Lena was standing 6 feet from Riker with her weight balanced and her expression neutral. The next moment, she was inside his guard. How she'd closed the distance so quickly with a reconstructed knee, nobody could afterward quite explain. Her right hand had redirected his instinctive grab. She'd used his own forward lean against him. And Riker was on one knee on the concrete floor with her hand at the back of his neck in a position that every man in the room recognized because they'd all been trained in it. Control hold. Takedown variation. Clean textbook and achieved against a 230-pound man in a time frame that should not have been physically possible. Nobody said anything. Riker was very still. Not because he couldn't move, he could have tried to break it. But he was still in the particular way of someone who has just had their internal model of a situation completely overwritten, and the override is still processing. Lena released the hold and stepped back. Up, she said. Riker stood. He turned to face her. His expression was a complicated thing. There was anger in it, and there was something underneath the anger that was different and harder to look at directly. Genbaum, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said. That was the demonstration. Now you know. Genbaino. Gen, he said, harder this time. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, why mono? Because one time could be luck. It wasn't luck, she said. But I'll tell you what, if you can put me on the ground in the next 90 seconds, today's evaluation gets modified to accommodate whatever you think you need to prove. She looked at the room. All of you, 12 men, 90 seconds. Neutralize me and Rex before the time runs out. The room erupted. Not in words, in the kind of charged electric stillness that comes right before everyone starts talking at once. Torres was the first to actually speak. Instructor, he said carefully. That's a standing offer, Lena said. Take it or leave it. Riker looked at the other men. They looked back at him. Voss was already moving away from the wall. Riker said, you're serious. I don't make unserious offers, she said. He looked at Rex. The dog is part of it. Rex is always part of it, she said. And that was when Riker made a decision that would define the next 8 minutes more completely than any decision he'd made in 3 combat deployments. He said, take him. Minute 8, first major audience hook. What happened next, the men would talk about for the rest of their careers. Not all at once, it wasn't a story anyone told casually, because to tell it accurately, you had to admit certain things about yourself and your assumptions that took time to be willing to say out loud. But eventually, in pieces in different contexts, each of them would find themselves telling some version of it to someone who hadn't been there. All 12 moved at once. That was Riker's strategy, and it was the right strategy. 12 trained combat soldiers moving in coordinated fashion against a single target leaves no angle uncovered and no window of response wide enough to be useful. He'd done the math in about 3 seconds, and it was correct math. What he hadn't done was account for Rex. The first man, Briggs, who came in fast from the left flank, found Rex between himself and Lena before he'd taken 2 steps. Not aggressive, not biting. Rex planted himself in Briggs's path with 78 pounds of immovable intention and a sound low in his throat that communicated clearly and without ambiguity that the next step would be a different kind of conversation. Briggs hesitated. 1 second. That was all it took. Lena used that second. She moved to the right toward the 3 men coming from that angle, which was counterintuitive enough that the man in front, a corporal named Haas, actually stopped for a half step because she was moving toward him and his brain hadn't processed why yet. She used that half step. Haas went down. Then the man beside him, she redirected his grab and he spun into the man behind him. And suddenly there were 2 men on the floor on the right side and a third fighting his own teammate to stay upright. Riker was coming from the center. He was fast for his size, and he had learned from the first time he didn't reach, didn't lunge, came in low with his weight controlled. He was good. He was genuinely good. He got close enough to touch her. What happened then was a matter of maybe 4 inches of space and a technique that Lena had spent 11 months drilling until it was faster than conscious thought. She used his size. She used his momentum. She used the fact that he was strong enough that when she redirected that strength, it went somewhere with significant velocity. Riker hit the floor. Hard. Not dangerously, she'd controlled the trajectory, but hard enough that the sound of it was loud in the concrete room, and every man still standing felt it in their chest. From the floor, Riker said something that wasn't a word. Then he pushed himself up immediately because he was Riker and went back at her. Rex was managing the perimeter, not attacking, not biting, using his body and his voice and the sheer force of his presence to create hesitations to interrupt momentum, to give Lena those critical half seconds that were the difference between manageable and not. He was not a weapon in this moment. He was an extension of her strategy, moving the way she moved, reading the room the way she read it, because they had trained together long enough that the communication between them had stopped being commands and started being something else. At the 60-second mark, 7 men were down or disengaged. Riker was up again. Voss was still standing. Torres, in this surprised her, had not moved from his position at the edge of the group. She looked at him between movements. Just a glance. He was watching, not frozen, watching, taking it apart in real time. At 81 seconds, Riker reached her again. This time he grabbed her right arm with both hands, and he had the grip, he had the strength and the grip and the angle. And if he'd been fighting anyone whose entire training wasn't built around exactly this scenario, it would have ended there. It didn't end there. It ended with Riker on the floor for the 3rd time, his own momentum used against him, and Lena standing over him with her breathing elevated, but controlled her knee brace, holding Rex at her left shoulder. 90 seconds. The room was breathing hard. Some men were on the floor. Some were standing and looking at their hands like they were trying to understand what had happened to them. Briggs was sitting against the wall with a dazed expression that had nothing to do with physical injury. Torres still hadn't moved. Lena looked at him across the room. "You didn't engage," she said, not accusatory. "No," Torres said. "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I was watching how you did it, and 12 men wasn't going to change the outcome." He paused. The math didn't work. For the first time in 2 days, Lena Cross smiled. Not large, not performed, just real. "That," she said to the room, "is adaptive threat assessment." She looked at the men getting up off the floor. Sergeant Riker made the correct calculation with the information he had. He failed because his threat model was missing a variable. She looked at Riker. What was the variable? Riker standing now, jaw tight, breathing controlled Rex. "Partially," she said. "The variable was how Rex and I function as a single system. You planned for 2 targets. You were fighting 1 unit." She let that sit. "That is what you are going to learn to be in this program. Not 12 individuals with good individual skills. 1 unit." She looked at the room. The difference between those 2 things is why some people come home and some people don't. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a comment. Riker looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, and he said it quietly in a voice that was stripped of performance, "Where did you learn that?" "The same place everyone learned everything that matters," she said. "I got hurt badly enough that I had to figure out another way." Minute 15, major twist. The direct engagement evaluation that afternoon started at 1300 hours, and by 1420 it had become clear that something had fundamentally changed in the room. Not dramatically, not obviously, but Lena could read a group the way Rex could read a scent trail and layers in information in the small data points that most people walk past without registering. And what she read in that room at 1420 was this: Riker was still leading, but he was leading differently. He was leaving space. He was asking one or two of the quieter men for input before deciding, not because he'd been told to, not because she was watching, but because something in the morning had shifted the weight of his own assumptions just far enough that the space appeared. It was Torres who first noticed her noticing. They were running a communication drill, rapid relay scenario information passing through 6 checkpoints under time pressure, and Torres ended up next to her at the 3rd checkpoint, both of them watching Riker's sub-team work through a coordination problem. "He's actually good," Torres said quietly. "Yes," Lena said. "He is. He's just been the biggest thing in every room he's ever been in," Torres said. "So he stopped looking at the doors." Lena glanced at him. "Is that what happened to you before you were reassigned here?" Torres was quiet for a beat too long. "Different problem," he said, "but the same category." He looked at her. "What category is that?" "Knowing what you're capable of and not being able to convince the room it matters," she said. Torres looked away. Something moved across his face that he wasn't going to name in a conversation they were having while 12 men ran drills 20 feet away. "You read all our files," he said. "I read all your files," she confirmed. "Then you know why I'm here." "I know what the file says." "Which is?" She looked at him steadily. "That you identified a critical failure point in a field operation and reported it through channels, and your commanding officer didn't act on it, and 3 people were injured who didn't have to be." Torres said nothing. "And then you put your assessment in writing," she said, "which made it official, which made it a record, which made certain people uncomfortable. And here you are." The silence between them was the kind that has weight. "Here I am," he said. "Good," Lena said, and she walked to the next checkpoint. Torres stood there for a moment, then he followed. Minute 22. Second audience hook rising intensity. At 15:45, the day took a turn nobody planned for. They were running the final scenario of the afternoon night prep simulation, low-light conditions in the indoor tactical structure teams, rotating through in sequence, when Lena's radio clicked twice on the command channel. The signal that meant base security had flagged something outside the wire. She stepped outside. The perimeter duty officer was a young sergeant named Cole, who she didn't know well, but who had a reputation for being careful. He was careful now. "We've had a breach report from the east sensor grid," Cole said. "Probably an animal, but protocol requires a sweep." "When 20 minutes ago, and you're telling me now?" Cole shifted. "The report got stuck in the queue. I need to know the minute there's a flag on this compound's grid," she said. "Not 20 minutes later. The minute." "Yes, instructor." She went back inside. She didn't change the afternoon schedule. She didn't tell the men. But she moved Rex from his rest position to active, and Rex shifted the way he shifted when the status changed, a lift in his posture, a reorientation of his attention toward the east wall. Nobody noticed except Torres. He was watching Rex the way someone watches a thing they're trying to understand. He saw the shift. He looked at Lena. She didn't acknowledge him. The scenario ran. Riker's team went through first clean, efficient, significantly improved from the morning. Riker came out of the structure and didn't say anything but stood up straighter, and Lena marked something in her notes and moved on. Torres' sub-team went second. And in the middle of Torres' run, at exactly the point where his team was deepest into the structure, furthest from the exit, working the second floor clearing, Rex stood up, not alarmed, not barking. He simply stood, turned toward the east wall, and pushed his nose forward in a way that Lena had seen exactly twice before in 2 years of working with him. She was on the radio before any of the other men in the room understood what was happening. "Cole, confirm east grid status, now." 3 seconds of silence, then, "We got 2 more flags, instructor. South sensor just tripped also." Cole's voice changed. "Instructor, we have visual confirmation. 3 individuals, civilian presentation inside the perimeter, armed." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. For 1 second, just one, everyone froze. Then Lena was moving, and her voice was the thing that broke the freeze, clear and flat. and carrying Torres, get your team out of that structure right now. Riker, north wall defensive position. Nobody moves outside this building without my signal. Everyone listen for Rex. Riker looked at her. For a split second, just a fraction, the old calculation crossed his face. The one that asked why he should take the order. Then it passed. North wall, he said to the men. Move. They moved. Rex was at Lena's side, body forward, ears rotating, reading the east wall with every sense available to him. He made no sound. That was almost more frightening than if he had that focused, total silence that meant he was tracking something specific and was waiting. Lena got on the radio to base command. She reported the situation. She gave the position of the 12 trainees. She requested immediate backup and gave the coordinates. Command's response backup was 12 minutes out. 12 minutes. She looked at 12 men pressed against the north wall of an indoor tactical structure with no weapons training scenario. Live weapons secured 3 armed individuals inside the perimeter, unknown intent, and 12 minutes until anyone else arrived. Riker looked at her from across the room. No mockery, no performance. His voice was low and clear. What do we do? She looked at him. She looked at all of them. We hold this position, she said. We do not engage. We do not move outside. We control what we can control, and we give backup time to arrive. And if they come to us, Voss asked. Rex answered, not with a bark, with a low sustained sound from his chest that vibrated in the concrete floor and said to anyone who understood the language, they are close, and I know exactly where they are. Then, Lena said, Rex and I handle the door. You and the preacher, Briggs said, not mocking, genuinely. Me and Rex, she said. Riker pushed off the wall. I'm with you. No, she said. Your job is to keep 11 men calm and contained and out of each other's way in a small space under stress. That is not a smaller job than the door sergeant. That is an equals job, and it requires the right person. Riker stopped. His jaw worked. Torres from the far end of the wall said quietly, She's right, Riker. Riker looked at Torres, then back at Lena. He went back to the wall. The 12 minutes that followed were the longest 12 minutes of the day, and possibly the longest of several of the men's lives, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. They held. They stayed contained. Rex worked the door with Lena, and the 3 individuals outside tested the perimeter in 2 places and both times withdrew before making contact. And when backup arrived at the 11-minute 40-second mark, it was to a situation that was controlled. All personnel accounted for no injuries. The 3 individuals were apprehended 200 meters east of the compound. They were not terrorists, not enemy operatives. They were civilians who had made a wrong turn in a way that base security would spend the next week explaining how it had happened. Their weapons were hunting rifles. Their confusion was genuine. The threat had been real in every way that mattered, the response it required, the decisions it demanded, the seconds where nobody knew exactly what was coming next. In the debrief afterward, the room was different from any room that had existed between these people before. Riker sat down first. He didn't wait for Lena to direct the debrief. He looked at the men and said, Walk me through every decision you made in the last 12 minutes and tell me what you'd change. Lena stood at the side and let him run it. Torres answered first, then Voss, then Briggs, who said something that surprised everyone. He said, I almost moved. When Rex made that sound the second time, I almost went for the door because I couldn't stand being still. What stopped you? Riker asked. Briggs looked across the room at Lena. She wasn't moving, he said, and she was closer to the door than I was. So I figured if she wasn't moving yet, I probably shouldn't move yet. Lena absorbed this without comment. Torres wrote something in his notebook. When the debrief finished and the men were filing out, Voss paused beside Rex on his way past. He didn't reach down to pet him. He'd read the vest, but he stopped and looked at him for a moment, the way you look at something you've revised your understanding of, and then he kept walking. Rex watched him go. Outside, the base was settling into evening again. Lena sat on the same concrete barrier as the night before making notes. The broken cane was gone from the east entrance. Someone had removed it today quietly without announcement. She didn't know who. Riker didn't come to find her this time, but Torres did. He stopped a few feet from her, hands in his pockets. You knew, he said. She looked up. Knew what? That something was off before Cole called it in. Rex told you and you knew. He paused. You moved him to active status and didn't tell any of us. I didn't have confirmed information. But you acted on what you had. Yes, she said. Torres was quiet. That's what I did, he said, in the field, before the report. I acted on what I had before it was confirmed, and my CO called it unauthorized, and the report called it a protocol deviation, and he stopped. Lena set her pen down. The difference, she said carefully, between a protocol deviation and good judgment is usually who's writing the report afterward. Torres said nothing for a long time. The evening was coming down around them. Rex lifted his chin from his paws and looked at Torres with those amber eyes. Why do you trust him so completely? Torres asked. Not about the CO, about Rex. Because he's never once told me what I wanted to hear, she said. He only ever tells me what's true. Torres looked at Rex for another moment. Then he nodded not to Lena, just to himself, the way people nod when something clicks into place that they've been waiting to understand. He walked back toward the barracks without another word. Lena picked up her pen. The evening settled. The diesel smell came back with the cooling air. Rex put his head back down, ears relaxed, breathing slow. Tomorrow was day 3, the real assessment, the one where she would learn what these 12 men were actually made of, and whether any of what had happened in 2 days had gone deep enough to matter when it counted. She wrote until the light was gone. Day 3 started before dawn. Not because Lena scheduled it that way, because at 04:17, her radio went off, and the voice on the other end wasn't Cole or base command or anyone she expected. It was Major Hargrove, the installation's senior training officer, the man whose signature was on her assignment papers, and he said 4 words that told her everything she needed to know about how the next several hours were going to go. My office, right now. Rex was already up. He'd heard the radio before she reached it, which meant he'd been awake before that, which meant he'd been tracking something in the compound that she hadn't heard yet. She clipped his vest on in the dark and they moved. Hargrove's office was lit up at 04:30 like it had been lit all night. He was behind his desk with the look of a man who had made several phone calls he hadn't wanted to make and received several calls he'd wanted even less. He was 54 years old, thin in the way that career military men sometimes get. Not lean, just worn down to the essential, and he had a file open on his desk that Lena recognized immediately because it had her name on the tab. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Rex sat beside her. Hargrove looked at the dog for a moment, then at her. I got a formal complaint filed this morning, he said, from Sergeant Riker. The room went very still inside Lena. The complaint alleges, Hargrove continued reading from a printed document, that you engaged in unauthorized physical contact with a trainee during a training demonstration, specifically a takedown maneuver performed without the trainee's informed consent, creating a hostile and unsafe training environment. He set the document down. Lena said he challenged me in front of the full group. I responded to the challenge. He says he didn't issue a formal challenge. He said, and I quote, show me, with 11 witnesses present. Cross. He also took my cane and broke it, she said. On day 1, I didn't file anything. Hargrove leaned back. He looked at her in a way that was less like a superior officer and more like a man trying to figure out something that isn't fitting together the way it should. The complaint was filed at 0200 this morning, he said. You had an incident at the compound last evening, the civilian breach. Yes. Riker was in that debrief. Yes. And after the debrief, he filed this. Hargrove tapped the document. Help me understand what happened between those 2 events. Lena looked at him steadily. I can't tell you what happened inside Sergeant Riker's head between 1800 and 0200, she said. What I can tell you is that the debrief last night went well. He ran it himself. He showed real leadership instinct. Hargrove watched her, and that bothered him. It wasn't a question. Lena said nothing. Some men, Hargrove said slowly, can handle being shown up physically. They can handle being outmaneuvered tactically. What they can't handle, he paused, is being shown that they're capable of more than they've been allowing themselves to be, because that comes with an obligation. The silence in the room was full of things neither of them said. What do you need from me? Lena asked. I need to know if you want to file a counter-complaint about the cane incident. No. Cross, no, she said again. I need to run day 3, that's what I need. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment, then he closed the file. The complaint is logged, he said. It will be reviewed. You continue your assignment. He paused. And Cross, the next time a trainee touches your equipment or you're a person in a way that isn't authorized, you file it. That same day. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Dismissed. She walked out into the pre-dawn dark with Rex, and for approximately 30 seconds, she stood still and breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, out slow, the way she'd taught herself in the hospital, when the pain was bad enough that breathing was the only thing she could control. Rex pushed his shoulder against her left leg. I know, she said quietly. Let's go. They walked back toward the training compound, and Lena began restructuring day 3 in her head, because what Hargrove had just told her without intending to was that Riker had gone home after the best performance of his time at this base and immediately filed paperwork against her, which meant the complaint wasn't about the takedown. The complaint was about something that had shifted in him that he didn't know how to sit with. And that changed the shape of what today needed to be. She had 3 hours before 0600. She used them. At 0558, 12 men assembled in the briefing room. Riker was there. He stood in his usual place and his face gave nothing away, and he looked at Lena when she walked in with the specific neutrality of someone who has made a decision and is committed to the performance of it. Lena looked at him. She looked at all of them. She said, "Today is different." The room waited. "We're running a live tactical scenario," she said. "Full compound, real-time decision-making, no scripted parameters." She looked at her notes, or appeared to. She'd memorized the outline already. "You'll be divided into 2 teams. Team assignments are on the board behind you. Objectives will be given at the start of the scenario. You have until this briefing ends to ask questions about rules of engagement." Voss raised his hand. "Is this graded?" "Everything is graded," she said. "That's the wrong question." Voss put his hand down. Torres raised his. "What are we protecting each other?" Lena said. "That's always the right answer." She turned to the board and began laying out the team structure. She put Riker on Team 1. She put Torres on Team 2. She put herself with Team 2 forward observation role. Riker noticed the team assignments before she finished writing them. She could tell by the way his weight shifted. He said, "You're putting yourself on a team." "Yes." "You participate in the scenario." "Yes." "With Rex." "With Rex." Something moved behind his eyes. "And what does Rex do in this one?" "Same thing Rex always does," she said. "What needs to be done?" Minute 10, first major twist. The scenario began at 0800 sharp. The setup was this: Team 1, led by Riker, was tasked with securing a designated command point in the east section of the compound. Team 2, with Torres running the tactical lead and Lena as forward observer, was tasked with reaching that same command point from the opposite direction. The twist, which both teams had been told about openly, because the point of this exercise wasn't surprise. It was decision-making under competition, was that only one team could occupy the command point at the end of the 90-minute window. It sounded simple. It was not simple. The compound had 6 intersecting routes, 3 choke points, in a central open area that anyone crossing was fully exposed in for approximately 40 seconds. The teams were equal in number. They were not equal in experience because Riker's team had the 3 men with the most conventional tactical training between them. Torres's team had the 2 quietest, most observant men in the group, which Lena had noticed on day 1 and factored in when she made assignments at 0200 this morning. Torres ran a clean first 30 minutes. He kept his team tight, moved them through the compound's secondary routes, communicated in the compressed, efficient shorthand of men who are starting to actually listen to each other instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. Lena stayed left slightly behind the team's main body, Rex, at her side. She wasn't directing. She was watching. She was watching Torres, specifically watching how he read the route, how he adjusted when one path was slower than he expected, how he communicated the adjustment to the men around him. And she was watching for the thing she'd identified in his file, the pattern that had defined his career the moment he saw what needed to happen and went quiet instead of saying it. It came at the 32-minute mark. They were approaching the north choke point, a narrow passage between 2 structures that opened into the east side of the compound. The command point was 400 meters beyond it. Riker's team, based on the sound patterns Lena had been tracking for 20 minutes, was coming from the south route, which was faster but more exposed. They would reach the command point before Torres's team if both teams continued on their current trajectories. Torres stopped. He looked at the route. He looked at the timeline, and then he went very quiet in the particular way that Lena had been waiting for. She said, Torres. He looked at her. Say it, she said. He looked back at the route. If we move 2 men through the central area now, they can reach the command point before Riker's main body, but they're exposed for 40 seconds in the open. If Riker's forward element has already reached the east side, finish the sentence, Lena said. They don't make it, he said, and we're down 2. So what do you do? I don't split the team, he said immediately. Then how do you reach the command point before Riker does? The silence lasted 4 seconds. In a real scenario, 4 seconds is a very long time. Then Torres looked at Lena, then at Rex. Something crossed his face. You know where Riker's team is right now, he said. It wasn't a question. Rex's ears had been oriented southeast for the last 6 minutes. Rex tells me where people are, Lena said simply. Where is Riker's team, Rex? Rex looked southeast and his posture said what it always said when the thing he was tracking was close, but not immediate. They haven't reached the east side yet, Torres said. No, Lena said. So we have a window. A small one. Torres turned to his team. His voice changed, became something cleaner, more direct, like a channel that stopped carrying interference. Full team north choke point, fast. Don't stop, don't look back. We move until we're through. Go. They went. The 40 seconds crossing the central approach were the most electric 40 seconds of the scenario. Torres led from the front, which surprised 2 of the men behind him because he hadn't led from the front before this moment. Rex moved with Lena on the left flank, and the entire team came through the north choke point and into the east approach in a single coherent push that Lena, watching from the rear, thought was the most tactically sound movement she'd seen from any of them in 3 days. They reached the command point at the 61-minute mark. Riker's team came into view from the south at the 63-minute mark. They stopped. Riker looked at the command point, at Torres, at Lena and Rex behind Torres. The math was immediate and it was clear, and there was nothing in it that was ambiguous. His team had lost. Voss behind Riker said something under his breath. Riker didn't say anything. He looked at the command point for a long moment, and then he looked at Torres, and something passed between them that wasn't quite acknowledgement and wasn't quite respect, but was something that lived in the neighborhood of both. How did you know our position? Riker asked. Torres said Rex. Riker looked at the dog for a moment. Rex looked back at him. Then Riker looked at Lena. He told you, Riker said. He always tells me, she said. Riker was quiet. Then he said, I filed a complaint this morning. The words landed in the open air between both teams like something dropped. Several men went very still. Lena looked at him. About the takedown, Riker said. He said it flatly to the group like a man reading a statement he's decided to correct before it spreads. I filed it at 0200. I want to withdraw it. Torres stared at him. Voss said, Riker. I filed it because I didn't know what to do with yesterday, Riker said. He was looking at Lena when he said it. That's not a good reason. He paused. The takedown was a training exercise. I challenged her. She responded. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. I'll put the withdrawal in writing before end of day. The silence that followed was the kind that can go several directions at once. It could become uncomfortable or charged, or it could become the thing it actually became, which was something closer to a collective exhale. Lena said noted, nothing more. She moved past it the same way she'd moved past the cane on day 2, not making it larger than it was, not making it smaller than it was, just acknowledging and continuing. Torres was the one who stepped forward and said to Riker, you want to debrief the route? And just like that, the 2 team leaders were talking through the scenario, and the other men gathered around, and Lena stood at the edge with Rex and watched 12 men start to function, like something that might one day become a unit. Minute 22, audience hook major escalation. At 1300 hours, the scenario had been debriefed, and the men were at the midday break when Lena's radio went off again. Not Hargrove this time. Cole. His voice was different from the morning tighter, faster, with the specific compression of someone who is keeping themselves calm by controlling their volume. Instructor Cross, we have a situation. 3 individuals different from last night. Armed military-style presentation inside the perimeter. West section, they have a pause. 1 beat too long. They have base personnel, 1 confirmed, possibly 2. We are not calling this a drill. Lena was already moving. What's the status on backup? Requested 14 minutes. 14 minutes. She did not say what she thought about 14 minutes. She said, copy, I'm coming to you. She clicked off and turned to find Riker already behind her, having been close enough to hear. Real, he said, not a question. Real, she confirmed. His face did something that she would remember for a long time afterward. It lost every trace of the political calculation that had lived in it since day one. What was underneath was something much simpler and much older. A man who knows what to do and is ready to do it. Tell me what you need, he said. She looked past him at the 11 other men coming to their feet, the break atmosphere already gone. 12 sets of eyes reading her in the radio and Rex's posture and arriving at the same answer. Rex was in full alert facing west, his body a line of focused information. No live weapons in this training scenario, she said, and the words were careful because they had to be. Which means we go to ground and hold, and we give backup 14 minutes. And if they don't give us 14 minutes, Riker said. She looked at him. If they move toward this position before backup arrives, he said. What's the protocol? We protect our people, she said, with what we have. Rex, he said. Rex, she confirmed. Riker turned to the group. He didn't wait for her to direct it. He began placing men 3 to the west approach as early warning 2 at the main corridor, the remaining 7 in a secured central position. He did it quickly and he did it correctly, and he only consulted Lena twice, both times briefly, both times accepting her input and incorporating it without hesitation. Torres took the west approach position and went quiet in the way he went quiet when he was fully engaged. Voss went with him. Lena and Rex went to the main corridor. The 14 minutes that followed were the kind of time that doesn't move at a regular speed. It stretches in some places and compresses in others, and what you remember afterward isn't a sequence of events, but a collection of moments with the spaces between them gone. At minute 4, Rex's posture changed. Lena recognized it and got on the radio. Cole, they're moving. Confirmed, we have visual, they're heading. Cole's voice cut out for 2 seconds. When it came back, it was faster. East corridor, they're coming to you. Lena looked at the main corridor, then at the position of her 12 men, then at Rex. She made a decision that was not in any manual, not because the manual didn't cover the situation, but because the manual hadn't been written by someone standing where she was standing with what she had. She said to Riker, stay with the group. Do not move until you hear from me or until you hear Rex. Riker said, I'm not letting you go out there alone. I'm not asking for permission, she said. He looked at her hard, flat, the look of a man who sees what she's doing and knows she's right and hates it. Lena, her name, first name, he'd never used it before. She met his eyes. Keep them here, Sergeant. That is the job. She moved before he could answer. Rex moved with her, the 2 of them flowing into the East Corridor approach, with the wordless coordination of 2.5 years of working together, and as she moved, Lena felt something settle in her chest, not calm exactly, but the thing underneath fear when you have made your decision and accepted what it costs. She'd felt it before, on the training table in the surgical ward when the doctor told her she might not regain full mobility. On the first day she'd put the brace on and walked the length of the hospital corridor with Rex beside her. Each step an argument against every person who'd looked at her and written an assessment based on what they could see. She rounded the corridor bend, and the 3 individuals were 15 meters away. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be the subject of multiple after-action reports, 2 formal reviews, and 1 conversation that Riker would have quietly with Torres 6 weeks later, where he would try to explain what he'd seen from the corridor entrance after he'd told his men to hold and moved up alone to keep eyes on her position. He would tell Torres she didn't hesitate. He would tell Torres Rex moved first and she moved with him, and the 2 of them covered that 15 meters like something that had been rehearsed 10,000 times, which it had, but you don't see that until you see it under real conditions. He would tell Torres one of them raised a weapon, and then Riker would stop talking for a moment, and Torres would wait, and Riker would say she got in front of it. Not because she didn't see it, she saw it before anyone else did. Rex had telegraphed it 4 seconds before the arm came up, and she had read Rex the way she always read Rex, which meant she knew. She stepped into the trajectory anyway, not because she didn't care about getting hurt, not because she was reckless, but because she had looked at the geometry of the corridor and she had understood that the angle the weapon was tracking wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the approach behind her, where 12 men were positioned, and where Riker, who she had told to stay back and who had not quite stayed back, was standing at the corridor mouth watching. The first shot went into her left leg. The second went into the right. She went down. Rex did not. Rex, 78 pounds of Belgian Malinois, with a scar through his jaw and 2.5 years of Lena's training in every muscle and nerve of him. Rex closed the remaining distance in the time it takes to exhale. He was silent until he wasn't. The sound he made when he reached the first individual was not a bark and not a growl. It was something older than either of those things. Something that comes from a place in a working dog that only opens when the thing they were built to protect is down. He was methodical. He was precise. He was ferocious in the specific, controlled way that ferocity can be when it has been trained by someone who understood that a dog's courage is most powerful when it is most directed. 2 of the 3 individuals went down in the time it took Riker to cross the corridor at a full sprint. The third turned toward Rex. Riker hit him from the left at full speed. Then backup arrived. Then there was noise and radios and boots on concrete and Riker on his knees beside Lena, with his hands on her legs because he was applying pressure. Before he was thinking about applying pressure, before he was thinking about anything except that she was on the floor and she was bleeding and she had stepped into the trajectory to cover 12 men who 2 days ago had laughed at her cane. Lena was conscious. Her face was the color of concrete, and her jaw was set in a way that looked like it might be holding back several things at once, but her eyes were open and they found Riker, and she said very quietly, "Rex." "He's here," Riker said. "He's right here." Rex was there. He had come back to her the moment the third individual went down. He was pressed against her side, her left side, always her left side, making the sound he made when she was in the hospital after the first surgery, that low, sustained sound from his chest, that the vet had told her wasn't distress exactly, but something closer to presence, saying, "I am here. I am here. I am not leaving." "Good boy," Lena said. Her voice was steady in a way that it shouldn't have been, and Riker kneeling over her, applying pressure to wounds that scared him in a way that 3 combat deployments had not prepared him for, heard it and felt something shift in his chest that he would not be able to name for several weeks. Torres arrived at a full run and stopped when he saw her. He looked at Riker. Riker looked at him. Between them passed something that needed no words. Torres went to the other men, keeping them back, keeping the corridor clear, managing the arrival of backup with a calm efficiency that Lena, if she'd been able to watch, would have noted in her file as the most significant performance indicator of the week. Medics reached her at the 4-minute mark. She was conscious until they got her on the stretcher. At the last moment before they moved her, she looked at Rex, who was walking beside her vest, still on Ira's back. Amber eyes fixed on her face, and she said one thing. She said, "Stay." Rex stopped. He watched them carry her away. He stood in the corridor with 12 men, and he did not make a sound and he did not move, and his eyes tracked her until she was out of sight, and then he sat down in the exact spot where she'd gone down, and he stayed. Riker stood a few feet away, blood on his hands, chest heaving, watching Rex sit. After a long time, Riker sat down on the corridor floor too. Voss looked at both of them. Then he sat down, then Briggs, then Torres and the man beside him, and the man beside him, until all 12 men were sitting on the floor of the east corridor of Fort Calloway, in a ring around the spot where Lena Cross had gone down, and at the center of that ring, a 78-pound Belgian Malinois sat perfectly still and waited. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. Outside, the backup was securing the perimeter, and radios were going, and the base was doing all the things bases do in the hour after something real has happened. Inside the corridor, for just a little while longer, something much simpler and much more important was taking place. 12 men who had walked in 2 days ago carrying every assumption they'd ever built about strength and size, and who gets to stand at the front of the room. 12 men were sitting with almost in the space where a small woman with a reconstructed knee and a broken cane had just taken 2 bullets to keep them breathing. And they were, every single one of them, starting to understand what that meant. Rex didn't eat that night. The base veterinarian, a quiet woman named Dr. Paulson, who had worked with military working dogs for 11 years, brought his food bowl to the corridor at 1800 hours because Rex had not moved from the spot where Lena went down. She set the bowl in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked back at the empty corridor where the stretcher had disappeared 4 hours ago. He didn't touch the food. Paulson sat beside him for a while without talking. That was something she had learned about working dogs. Sometimes presence was the only language that translated. She put her hand on his back lightly, and Rex tolerated it the way he tolerated most things from people who weren't Lena, which was with a patience that looked like acceptance but was actually something closer to waiting. Riker found them there at 1840. He'd been to the medical wing twice already. Both times he'd been told Lena was in surgery. Both times he'd been told to wait in the designated area, which he had done for approximately 7 minutes before standing up and walking back to the corridor, because sitting in a waiting room when something was wrong was not something his body knew how to do. He looked at Rex. He looked at the untouched food bowl. He looked at Paulson. "Is he okay?" Riker asked. Paulson looked up at him. "He's waiting," she said. Riker crouched down to Rex's level. Rex looked at him with those amber eyes that held everything and gave nothing away. And Riker held the look for a moment and said very quietly, like he was saying it to himself as much as to the dog, "She's coming back. You hear me? She is coming back." Rex looked at him for another moment. Then he put his chin down on his paws. Riker sat down on the concrete floor next to him. Paulson looked at the large combat veteran sitting on the floor next to the dog that was refusing to eat and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying more clearly. Torres arrived 10 minutes later with Voss behind him, then Briggs. By 1937 of the 12 men were in or near that quarter. Not because anyone had organized it, not because there was any tactical reason to be there, but because the corridor was the last place she'd been standing and the dog was there. And being somewhere else felt wrong in a way that none of them had the vocabulary for yet. They sat. They talked in low voices about nothing important. Someone produced coffee from somewhere. Rex didn't eat, but at 2000 hours he accepted a piece of something from Torres's hand, not eagerly, but he took it, and that felt like something. Torres looked at the piece of food Rex had taken, and then looked at his own hand and didn't say anything, but his expression did something complicated and private that he turned away from the group to finish. At 22:17, Riker's phone went off. It was the base medical officer. He stood up immediately, walked 10 feet away, listened for 90 seconds, and came back. 11 men looked at him. "She's out of surgery," he said, "both legs. The damage is..." He stopped, started again. "She's stable. The surgeon says the structural damage to both tibias is significant. The right knee reconstruction from before the hardware absorbed some of the impact. He stopped again, and the stopping was worse than anything he actually said, because Riker was not a man who stopped in the middle of sentences. "Tell us," Torres said. Riker looked at him. "She may not walk again," he said, "not the way she did before." The corridor went very quiet. Rex lifted his head. He looked at Riker for a long moment. Then he stood up, picked up the food from his bowl, and ate it. Methodically, without enthusiasm, but completely. Every piece. Nobody could have explained why that broke something open in the room. But it did. Voss turned away. Briggs put his face in his hands briefly, and then lifted it and looked at the ceiling. Torres closed his eyes and kept them closed for long enough that the man beside him put a hand on his shoulder. Riker stood in the middle of it all and felt something he hadn't felt since he was 19 years old, and had just learned what it actually cost to be in the places he'd volunteered to go. The weight of a consequence you can see clearly and cannot undo. The specific gravity of that. He looked down at Rex. Rex looked up at him. "What do we do now?" Voss asked. He wasn't asking tactically. He was asking the way people ask when they mean something larger. "We figure out what she needs," Riker said, "and we make sure she gets it." Minute 8, first major audience hook. The next morning, Riker arrived at Major Hargrove's office at 0700 without an appointment. Hargrove's assistant started to tell him he needed a schedule. Riker walked past her. Hargrove looked up from his desk. He read Riker's face in about 2 seconds, the way senior officers read faces, which is to say completely. He said to his assistant through the open door, "Close it." She closed it. Riker stood in front of the desk. He did not sit down. "I need to know about the investigation into what happened yesterday," he said. "It's ongoing," Hargrove said. "I need to know specifically what happens to Rex." The room changed temperature. Hargrove set down what he was holding. He looked at Riker with the careful attention of a man deciding how much to say. "Sergeant, he neutralized 2 armed individuals who were threatening base personnel," Riker said. "He protected Instructor Cross, and he protected my men." I need to know what the review board is going to do with that. Hargrove leaned back. The use of a service animal in an active threat situation outside of defined parameters is a regulatory matter, he said slowly. The K9 program has specific rules of engagement. Rex is registered as a service and support animal, not a tactical. He saved lives, Riker said. I understand that. Do you, Riker said, and his voice didn't rise, which somehow made it sharper. Because what I'm hearing from you sounds like the regulation is more important than what actually happened in that corridor. Hargrove looked at him for a long time. What I'm telling you, Sergeant, is that there will be a review. The outcome of that review is not something I can predict or guarantee. Rex's actions, while arguably justified, exceeded his registered operational parameters. The review board will make a determination. What kind of determination, Riker said. What's on the table? The pause that followed was a half-second too long. Hargrove, Riker said, what is on the table? Euthanasia is a listed outcome when a military or government-registered animal causes physical harm to a human being outside of authorized parameters, Hargrove said. He said it quietly, not easily. Even when that harm was protective in nature, the regulatory framework does not always have room for context. Riker stood very still. That dog, he said, is the reason there are 12 men walking around this base today instead of... He stopped himself. You cannot let that happen. It is not my decision alone, Hargrove said. The review board. Then tell me who is on the review board, Riker said. Tell me what I need to do, and who I need to talk to, and what I need to put in writing, and I will do every single piece of it. Hargrove looked at him. The calculation behind his eyes was visible. A senior officer doing rapid math about what the soldier in front of him would actually do if given the information and what the consequences of that would be up and down the chain. If you involve yourself in the review process in an unauthorized capacity, he said carefully, it could complicate the outcome rather than help it. Then tell me the authorized capacity, Riker said. There is one. There's always one. What is it? Hargrove was quiet for a moment. A formal witness statement, he said finally, from personnel present at the incident, submitted through proper channels to the review board. If that statement accurately documents Rex's actions, the threat level, the absence of other available response options, and the outcome, the board is required to consider it. Riker was already reaching for the notepad on Hargrove's desk. That's my notepad, Hargrove said. I'll replace it, Riker said. He walked out. Minute 15, major twist. Within 4 hours, Riker had 11 co-signed statements, not typed, handwritten because handwritten felt like it meant something more, like it was harder to dismiss. 11 men sitting in the briefing room that had started all of this, the same room where the broken cane had been dropped on the floor where Lena had walked in on day one, and 12 men had decided she was nothing. 11 men writing in their own words, in their own handwriting, exactly what they had seen in that quarter. Voss wrote 3 pages. He wasn't a man who wrote 3 pages of anything ever, but he wrote 3 pages because once he started, he couldn't figure out where to stop. Briggs wrote 1 page, dense every line to the margin, and when he was finished, he read it back to himself and added a line at the bottom that said, I have been in 2 combat deployments, and I have never seen anyone, human or animal, move the way Rex moved to protect a person who was down. That is the complete truth, and I will say it in person to whoever needs to hear it. Torres wrote his statement and then wrote a second document, unsolicited, unprompted, that was a formal analysis of Rex's tactical behavior during the incident, structured the way his reports from the field had always been structured, precise and referenced, and impossible to dismiss without engaging with the substance of it. He put it in a separate envelope addressed to the review board chair by name. He looked up the name. Riker's statement was the last and the shortest. 11 men had written the what. He wrote the why. He wrote about standing in the corridor mouth after he'd been told to stay back watching a 22-year-old woman step into a bullet trajectory to cover 12 men who 3 days earlier had laughed at her cane. He wrote about Rex. He wrote about what the word protection actually means. When you strip away the regulations and the parameters and the paperwork and get down to the moment where one living thing puts itself between harm and the people it has decided to guard. He wrote, I have filed 1 document against instructor Cross since arriving at this base. This is the last document I will ever file that isn't in support of her or of Rex. I am requesting formal review board consideration of Rex's immediate retirement under instructor Cross's permanent custody with full recognition of his actions as justified protective response. I am also requesting through proper channels that this statement be read into the record by someone who was there. He signed it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he added one line at the bottom. He wrote, "She told me to keep him safe." Rex made sure she could say that. That is what loyalty looks like. The regulation should learn from it. He submitted all 12 statements to Hargrove's office at 1400 hours, walked back to the corridor that had become, without anyone deciding it, the place where these 12 men now gathered, when they didn't know what else to do, and found Torres already there with Rex. Rex was lying with his head toward the direction of the medical wing. He'd been doing that, orienting himself toward the building where Lena was the way a compass needle finds north, regardless of how many times you spin it. Riker sat down next to him. "You think it'll work?" Torres asked. "The statements," Riker looked at Rex. "I think it has to." "That's not the same as thinking it'll work." "No," Riker said, "it's not." Torres was quiet for a moment. "She knew the risk," he said, "when she stepped into that corridor." "Yeah. She did it anyway." "Yeah," Riker said again. Torres looked at Rex. He knew too. He knew she was going down, and he went anyway. Riker said nothing. "That's the thing she kept trying to teach us," Torres said. "The whole 3 days. She never said it directly, but that was the thing. That the bravest people aren't the ones who don't feel the fear. They're the ones who know exactly what it costs, and they go anyway." The corridor was quiet around them. Rex shifted slightly, still facing toward the medical wing. "I almost didn't come here," Torres said. "After the reassignment, I almost put in for discharge." Riker looked at him. "I thought I was done," Torres said. I thought if I did the right thing and it got me buried, then what was the point?" He paused. 3 days with her, and I don't think that anymore." Riker was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you think instead, Bob?" Bam. Torres looked at the corridor where she'd gone down. "I think the point is this," he said. "Right here. 12 guys who didn't trust each other 3 days ago, sitting on a concrete floor, writing statements for a dog because a woman who could barely walk showed us what it actually looks like to lead." Riker absorbed this. He didn't have an answer for it. Sometimes there isn't one, and the right response is to let it sit. Rex put his head down on his paws and sighed a long, slow exhale that sounded to anyone listening like a creature carrying something heavy and choosing to carry it anyway. Minute 25, climax of Part 4. The review board met at 0900 the following morning. None of the 12 men were in the room. That was the role statement submitted, testimony requested, but the deliberation was closed. Riker had known this going in and had accepted it the same way he accepted every situation he couldn't control, which was by focusing hard on the one thing he could do, which was be present and ready for whatever came out the other side. They waited outside Hargrove's building. All 12 of them. Nobody had organized it. Nobody had said be there. They were just there, standing in the morning air, in a loose group that had a shape, now a coherence that hadn't existed 72 hours ago, and they waited. Rex was there too. Paulson had brought him from the veterinary holding space where he'd spent the night. Rex had made it clear, in the particular way that Rex made things clear, that he was going wherever the 12 men were going, and Paulson had the wisdom to let him. He sat at the center of the group. The board took 41 minutes. Riker counted them. At the 41st minute, Hargrove came through the door. He looked at 12 men in a Belgian Malinois arranged in the morning air outside his building, and he stopped on the step and looked at them for a moment with an expression that moved through several things before settling. He said, "The board reviewed all submitted statements." Nobody spoke. "Rex's actions have been formally documented as a justified protective response in an active threat situation," Hargrove said. "The board found that his behavior while outside registered parameters was consistent with the highest standards of working animal response to a direct threat to his handler and to adjacent personnel." Riker felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized had been locked. "The euthanasia determination has been set aside," Hargrove continued. "Rex is being recommended for early service retirement with commendation. His custody." Hargrove paused, and in the pause there was something human, something not officer, something that lived below the rank insignia. "His permanent custody has been assigned to Instructor Cross, effective upon her discharge from medical care." Torres closed his eyes. Voss made a sound that was not a word. Briggs turned away for a moment, and then turned back and whatever was on his face when he turned back, he made no effort to hide. Riker looked at Rex. Rex was looking at Hargrove with his amber eyes, and Riker could not have said what a dog understood about the words that had just been spoken, but he would swear for the rest of his life that something in Rex's posture changed at that moment. A subtle cellular kind of ease, like a cord that had been pulled taut for 2 days, had been allowed to slacken by a single degree. Riker said, "Can we see her?" Hargrove looked at him. "Immediate family and medical personnel only." Riker started. "Sergeant," Hargrove said, and his voice was not unkind. "She's unconscious. The surgical team expects her to remain so for at least another 18 hours. When that changes, you will be notified." He paused. "What I can tell you is that the medical team says a surgery went as well as it could have. What that means for her mobility long-term is something they can't fully answer yet." The group absorbed this. "Can Rex see her?" Torres asked. Quietly, like he wasn't sure if it was a reasonable question. Hargrove looked at Torres. He looked at Rex. He looked at Paulson, who was standing at the edge of the group with Rex's lead in her hand. Something moved in Hargrove's face, a consideration, a calculation, a man doing rapid math about rules and what they're actually for. "Dr. Paulson," he said, "is Rex current on all medical clearances for clinical environments?" Paulson blinked. "Yes, sir. He's fully certified." "Then I see no regulatory obstacle," Hargrove said carefully to a certified service animal visiting a medical facility where his handler is a patient. He looked at Riker. "That's not a family visit, Sergeant. That's a handler animal welfare protocol." Riker looked at Hargrove for a moment. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time in his career he had ever said those words to a superior officer and meant every syllable of them. Paulson took Rex to the medical wing. The 12 men watched them go. Then Torres said, "What do we do now?" And Riker said something that surprised every man who heard it, including himself. He said, "We finished the training." Several heads turned. "She built a program," Riker said. "She spent 3 days building something with us. We walk away from it now. That's what we take from it, 3 days. We finish it. We do it right. We do it the way she would run it." He stopped, looked at Torres. "You know the next 2 weeks of curriculum." Torres stared at him. "How would I?" "Because you took notes," Riker said. "Every day, every session. You're the only one who did." Torres looked down at his jacket pocket where his notebook always was. He looked at the building where Rex had just disappeared. He looked at Riker. "She'd want us to finish it," Riker said. "Not manipulatively, just as a fact. The way Lena stated facts plainly without theater because the truth didn't need decoration." Torres pulled out his notebook. He opened it to day 1. He looked at 12 men who 3 days ago had been 12 strangers held together by nothing but resentment and the same bad luck of reassignment, and who now were something he didn't have a word for yet, but that he recognized the shape of. Something that cohered. Something that had been built piece by piece by a woman who couldn't run and who didn't need to. "All right," Torres said. "Here's what she had planned for day 4. The men gathered around. In the medical wing 3 corridors away, Rex was lying beside a hospital bed with his chin on the mattress edge and his amber eyes on the face of the woman who had built him into what he was. The monitors above her were steady. Her breathing was even. She was pale and still in the particular way of deep sedation, and she did not know he was there. He stayed anyway. He put his chin on the mattress edge, and he watched her breathe, and he stayed because that was what he had always done and what he would always do, and no board of review and no regulatory framework and no set of parameters written by people who had never been in that corridor had ever changed that, and none of them ever would. Outside, 12 men sat around Torres's notebook and began without their instructor to learn the things she'd been teaching them from the moment she walked in with a broken cane and steady eyes and nothing to prove. How to be the kind of people who show up. How to be the kind of people who stay. She woke up on the 4th day. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies where someone gasps and sits up and immediately knows where they are. She came back slowly in layers the way consciousness returns. When the body has been through something, it needs time to forgive. First there was sound, the steady rhythm of monitors, the low hum of the medical wing's ventilation system, the distant movement of feet in a corridor. Then there was light through her eyelids, too bright, then manageable. Then there was weight, the specific familiar weight of something pressed against her left side that she knew before she knew anything else. Rex, he was lying against the bed rail with his chin on the mattress edge, exactly where he'd been for 4 days, getting up only when Paulson made him, eating only what Torres brought personally, because somewhere in the previous 96 hours, Rex had decided that Torres was the acceptable intermediary between himself and the world that wasn't Lena. When her fingers moved the smallest motion, just the index finger of her left hand shifting against the mattress, Rex's head came up. His ears went forward. His amber eyes fixed on her face with the total consuming attention of an animal whose entire world had just changed state. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. She said, "Hey." Her voice was wrecked, 4 days of tubes and sedation, but the word was clear. One syllable. And Rex made the sound. He made the chest sound, the one that didn't have a name in any manual. And he pushed his nose into her palm and stayed there while she lay still and breathed and came back to herself piece by piece. The nurse was in the room within 30 seconds. Dr. Harlan, the lead surgeon, was there within 4 minutes. He was a careful man who delivered information the way careful people do, completely, without softening the parts that hurt, but without any unnecessary force either. He told her what had happened to her legs. He told her about both tibias. He told her about the right knee hardware and what it had absorbed and what that meant for the reconstruction they'd done in surgery. He told her what the road ahead looked like. Lena listened to all of it without interrupting. Her hands stayed on Rex's head the entire time. When Harlan finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What's the realistic timeline for weight bearing?" Harlan looked at her. "That's your first question." "Yes," she said. "Several months," he said carefully. "With intensive rehabilitation, possibly sooner than the structural damage would suggest, but..." "I've done this before," she said. "I know," he said. "Your previous surgical notes are in your file. What you accomplished in your first recovery is it informed our approach." He paused. "You're going to need Rex more than before, at least initially." Lena looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. Something passed between them that the surgeon didn't try to interpret, because some communications don't need an outside observer. "He's been here the whole time?" she asked. "Yes," Harlan said. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't quite tears and wasn't quite not tears either. "Good," she said. "That's good." Minute 6, first mini-climax. Riker found out she was conscious at 0900 from a text that Torres sent to the group. He read it 3 times. Then he put his phone in his pocket and stood up from the briefing table where Torres had been running the morning session and said, "Give me 20 minutes. Torres looked at him. "Medical says no visitors outside." 20 minutes, Riker said again and walked out. He wasn't supposed to get past the second corridor. He got past all 3, not by force, not by rank, by the specific kind of forward motion that says, "I am going where I am going," and the conversation about whether that's permitted has already happened inside my head and been resolved. The nurse at the 3rd corridor started to tell him visiting hours were restricted, and Riker said very quietly, "I was there in that corridor. I need 2 minutes." She looked at him. She looked at his hands, which still had a ghost of something under the nails that no amount of washing had fully removed, and she made a decision that the regulations would not have approved of, and she let him through. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. She was propped slightly, both legs immobilized, Rex against her left side, and she was looking at the door when he appeared in it like she'd heard him coming, which she probably had. She'd always heard things before they arrived. They looked at each other across the room. Riker said, "You're awake." "Apparently," she said. He came in. He didn't sit. He stood at the side of the bed and looked at her the way he'd looked at the takedown on day 1, trying to understand something that was rearranging the categories he kept things in. "How are you feeling?" "Like I took 2 bullets, she said. He almost smiled. "Almost. The statements went through," he said. "The review board, Rex is cleared. He's..." "I know," she said. "Harlan told me." She paused. "You wrote them." "All of us did." Harlan said 12 statements, she said. 12. Riker looked at Rex briefly, then back at her. "You stepped in front of it," he said. The words came out with a roughness he didn't try to smooth. "You knew where it was tracking, and you stepped in front of it." "Yes," she said. "For us." "For the position," she said. "That's what..." "For us," he said again. He didn't say it loud. He said it with the finality of a man who is not going to accept the technical explanation because he was standing in the quarter mouth and he saw it, and he knows what he saw. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Outside the room, the medical wing hummed. Rex's breathing was slow and even. "Riker," she said, "why did you file the complaint?" It came out of nowhere and everywhere at once. He'd been waiting for it and dreading it, and it landed exactly as hard as he'd known it would. He was quiet for long enough that she could have changed the subject if she'd wanted to. She didn't want to. "Because you showed me something I didn't know how to carry," he said finally. "And I panicked, and I put it in writing because that's what I do. When I don't know what to do with something, I make it official, and I put it outside myself, and I let the system hold it." "What was the thing you didn't know how to carry?" He looked at his hands. "That I'd been wrong," he said, "about everything I thought I knew about what strength looks like, about who gets to be at the front of the room." He looked up. "I have been the biggest thing in every room I've ever been in my whole career. And then you walked in and you were," he stopped. "Small," she said, without defensiveness, just factually. "Real," he said. "That's the word. You were real in a way that made everything I'd been performing for 12 years look exactly like what it was." The room was very quiet. Rex shifted against the bed. His tail moved once slowly the way it moved when something in the room changed from tension to something else. "You withdrew it," she said. "Day 2, he said, "before the corridor." "Aw, I know," she said. "Hargrove told me this morning." She looked at him. "That mattered, Riker. Don't think it didn't." He nodded once, the gesture of a man accepting something he didn't feel he'd earned, but was going to take anyway because refusing it would be its own kind of dishonesty. "Go back to the training," she said. "Torres has the curriculum." He blinked. You have 9 more days," she said. "Go finish it. You're lying in a hospital bed with both legs." "I am aware of the condition of my legs," she said, and her voice had an edge in it now. Not anger, something sharper and more personal. Something that had been forged in an operating room 2 years ago and tested daily since. "I am also aware that 9 days of curriculum don't run themselves, and Torres is good, but he's not me, and those 11 men need to finish what we started." She looked at him directly. "Don't make my sacrifice decorative, Sergeant. Use it." Riker stood very still. Then he said, "Yes, instructor." For the first time in 4 days, Lena Cross smiled. Not the small edge of an expression from day one, a real one. Tired and real and complete. He walked out. Trim. Minute 14, major twist audience hook. On day 6 of her recovery, something happened that no one had planned for. The official investigation into the quarter incident, the 3 armed individuals, their presence on base, how they'd gotten through the perimeter had been running parallel to everything else handled by a separate team from base security and military intelligence. Riker knew it was happening. He'd given his statement. He'd assumed it would reach its conclusion in the background, while the world he was actually living in continued in the foreground. He assumed wrong. At 1400 on day 6, a man named Colonel Westfield arrived at Fort Calloway. He was from a department that Riker knew by reputation, the kind of department whose visits were never casual, never brief, and never good news for someone. Westfield went directly to Hargrove's office. He was in there for 2 hours. When he came out, he asked to speak with Riker. They sat in a small conference room with a table between them, and Westfield had a tablet in front of him, and he looked at Riker the way intelligence officers look at people cataloging patient, not unfriendly, but not warm either. "The 3 individuals from the corridor," Westfield said. "You understand they were not random." Riker looked at him. "I was told civilian." "That was the initial assessment," Westfield said. "It was incorrect. They were former contractors. Specifically former contractors who had a documented interest in disrupting certain training programs that were producing a particular kind of outcome." He paused. "Your training program specifically." The information landed in Riker's chest like something cold. "Someone sent them," Riker said. "Someone with access to assignment schedules and enough resources to place 3 armed individuals inside a military perimeter," Westfield said. "We are working to identify who. What I need from you is a complete account of anyone who expressed interest in your program structure or Instructor Cross's assignment in the days before the incident." Riker thought of the complaint he'd filed at 0200 on day 3. He thought of it with a sickness that started in his stomach and moved upward. "My complaint," he said, "the one I filed and withdrew." "Who had access to that?" Westfield looked at him without expression. It was processed through standard channels. Who had access to it? Riker said again. We are looking at that, Westfield said carefully, among other things. The room went very quiet. Riker looked at the table between them. He thought about Lena in that hospital bed. He thought about the trajectory she'd stepped into. He thought about the fact that the complaint he'd filed in a moment of panic and ego might have been the piece of information that told someone she was there, that her program was running, that the window existed. He thought about that for a long time. Tell me what you need, he said finally, and his voice was completely flat and completely controlled in the way of a man who has decided that what he feels about something is not relevant to what he's going to do about it. Westfield told him. It took 4 hours. Riker gave everything, every interaction, every detail, every name. He gave it with the precision of someone who understands that the accuracy of what he remembers right now could be the difference between something being prevented and something not being prevented. He left nothing out, not even the parts that reflected badly on himself, especially not those parts. When it was over, Westfield closed his tablet and said, "One more thing, Instructor Cross. Does she know about this aspect of the investigation?" "No," Riker said. "She was unconscious when it developed." "She'll need to be briefed," Westfield said, "given her role, given what she knows about the program structure." He paused. "I'd like you to be present when that happens, if she's willing." "Ask her," Riker said. "She makes her own decisions." Westfield almost smiled. "I've read her file," he said. "I'm aware." Riker walked out of that room and went directly to Torres, because Torres was the person he went to now when he needed to think, which was a development that would have been unimaginable to him 8 days ago, and which felt right now like one of the only solid things in a day that had gone to liquid. He told Torres everything. Torres listened without interrupting, which was one of his genuine gifts. When Riker finished, Torres was quiet for a moment and then said, "She's going to be angry." "About which part?" "All of it," Torres said, "but specifically about the idea that she was targeted, that the program was targeted." He paused, "Because that means it was working, and someone wanted it stopped." Riker looked at him. "Think about what that means," Torres said. "A program that teaches 12 men to follow a 22-year-old instructor with a reconstructed knee and a service dog. That program scared someone badly enough to send armed contractors onto a military base." He let that sit. "What were they afraid of?" 12 men who actually learned something, Riker said quietly. 12 men who learned that the assumptions they walked in with were wrong, Torres said. 12 men who might go back into the field and lead differently, follow differently, see differently. He paused. "That's not nothing, Riker. That's everything." Minute 23, resolution climax. Lena was briefed on day 7. Westfield sat across from her with Riker present. Paulson was in the corner with Rex, who had been allowed to stay, because Westfield, after 30 seconds in the room with Rex, made no attempt to remove him. Lena listened to the entire briefing without changing expression. When Westfield finished, she said the complaint. "We don't know definitively," Westfield said, "but it's a thread we're following." She looked at Riker. Riker held her gaze. He didn't look away. He decided before he walked in that he wouldn't look away, because looking away would be the easy thing, and he was finished doing the easy thing. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "Lena." "It wasn't," she said. "If someone had access to internal complaint filings on a secure military base, the mechanism was already in place before you filed anything. You were not the cause." She looked at him with the same steady eyes that had looked at him over that concrete floor on day 1, and in this hospital bed on day 4, and in every moment between. "Do you understand me?" He looked at her for a long time. "I'm working on it," he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 8 days, and she received it the way she received honest things, without ceremony, without diminishment, just acknowledgement. "Good," she said. Then to Westfield, "What do you need from me?" Westfield told her. She gave him 40 minutes of everything she had, her observations, her timeline, the things Rex had indicated in the hours before the incident. At one point, Westfield looked at Rex and said somewhat carefully, "You rely on the dog's assessments operationally. I rely on Rex's assessments the way I rely on any well-trained intelligence source," she said. "He's been wrong twice in 2.5 years. My human sources have a considerably worse record." Westfield wrote something down. When he left, the room was quiet for a moment. Riker was still in the chair across from her. Rex had moved from Paulson's side to Lena's because Paulson had stopped holding his lead at some point and he'd made his preference clear. "How's the training going?" Lena asked. "Torres is good," Riker said. "I know Torres is good," she said. "How is the training going?" Riker thought about it, which was something he'd started doing in the last week, taking the time to think before he answered, because Lena's questions had trained him to understand that the first answer wasn't always the true one. "It's different without you," he said, "but it's not worse. It's different the way things are different when you've changed and the thing you're doing is showing you that you've changed." She looked at him. "Say that again." "We're better than we were," he said. "Not as good as we'll be, but we're better and we know why we're better and we're not going back to what we were before." He paused. "That's you. You did that in 3 days." "You did that," she said. "I just stood in the room." "You stood in front of a bullet," he said. "That was operational," she said. "Lena," her name again the way he'd said it in the corridor. "Stop being technical about it." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Thank you for the statements, all 12 of them." She looked at Rex. "He's going to be with me now, officially. You know that means I can't—" She stopped. "Can't what?" Riker said. "When I come back," she said. "If I come back to an instructor role, he won't be tactical support anymore. He'll be Rex," Riker said. "That's what he'll be. And anyone who has a problem with what Rex is can talk to 12 men who were in a corridor 8 days ago." He paused. "There won't be many takers." Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile and was more than one. Yeah. Minute 30 final twist and closing. 3 weeks later, Lena took her first steps. Not alone, never fully alone anymore, which was something she was still making her peace with. The new version of mobility. The new version of what her body could do and how it needed to do it. The physical therapist was good. The sessions were hard in the specific way that the first recovery had been hard, which was the way of things that require you to convince your own nervous system to trust something it has learned to fear. Rex walked beside her for every step. Not guiding exactly, not supporting exactly. Just there the way he'd always been there, present, constant, a living proof that the world contained things that did not waver. On the day she walked the length of the physical therapy corridor, unassisted, 17 steps, each one a small argument against every person who had ever written an assessment of her based on what they could see, Paulson was standing at the end of it. In Torres, in Briggs, in Voss, in Riker. They'd come without telling her. Torres had found out from Paulson and told the others, and they'd driven from the training compound during a break and stood at the end of the corridor because they needed to be there, and they were the kind of people now who showed up for the things they needed to be present for. Lena saw them at step 12 and almost stopped. She didn't stop. She walked the last 5 steps and stood at the end of the corridor, breathing hard. Rex pressed against her left side, and she looked at 12 men who had walked into a room 3 weeks ago carrying every assumption they had ever built about who was allowed to be strong and who wasn't, and she looked at what they were now, and she said nothing because the corridor was saying it already. Riker stepped forward. He held out her cane, not the broken one, a new one, but on the handle someone had wrapped a small length of black tape and written on it in marker, in handwriting, she recognized as Torres's "She doesn't need it. She carries it anyway." That's the whole lesson. She took it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Riker and said, "You have 6 more days of curriculum." He almost laughed. Almost. The sound he made instead was something between a laugh and something older and less categorizable. "Yes, instructor," he said. "Torres," she said. Torres straightened. "Instructor. Your tactical analysis from the incident review," she said. "Hargrove forwarded it to me yesterday. He wants to incorporate it into the program curriculum." She paused. "He also wants you to help write the updated threat assessment protocols." She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "You'll be doing it from your new position since the promotion paperwork goes through next week." Torres stared at her. "The report you filed 2 years ago," she said, "the one that got you sent here. Westfield's investigation pulled it into a related review. The findings were, let's say, they shed new light on the command decisions that were made at the time." She watched his face go through several things at once. "You were right," she said simply. "The record now says so." Torres said nothing. His mouth was doing something that he was working very hard to control. Voss put a hand on his shoulder. Torres let him. Briggs looked at the ceiling again the way he did when something was happening in his face that he wasn't ready to show the room. Riker stood still. He was watching Lena with an expression that had nothing diplomatic in it, nothing performed, just a man looking at something real. Rex leaned against Lena's left leg. She put her hand on his head, and he turned and looked up at her, and his amber eyes held every quarter, every morning, every step of the long path that had brought them both to this place, scarred and rebuilt and standing. 6 days, she said again to the group, and then you graduate, and then you go back to the field. She looked at each of them in turn the way she had on day one face at a time. And when you get there, I need you to remember one thing, not the tactics, not the drills, not the scenario evaluations. The corridor was perfectly quiet. I need you to remember that the most dangerous assumption you will ever make is that you can tell what someone is capable of by looking at them. She looked at Rex, then at the cane in her hand, then at the 12 men in front of her. Because the person you underestimate is always, always more than you can see. And the moment you forget that is the moment the world reminds you, and the reminder is not gentle. She straightened, both legs holding, the brace whispering its small mechanical sound. Dismissed, she said. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Torres nodded. Then Riker turned toward the door, and the others followed. And as they passed her, each man did something small and different. Voss touched the doorframe briefly. Briggs looked at Rex and gave him the smallest nod. 3 others said nothing, but their shoulders carried something different than when they'd walked in. Riker was the last. He stopped beside her. He looked at Rex. He looked at the cane. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. He'd learned in the past 3 weeks that some things are larger than the words available for them, and that trying to fit those things into words is its own kind of reduction. He walked out. Lena stood into the corridor with Rex and the cane and the 17 steps behind her and the long road ahead, and she understood something she had always known, but that lived differently in her now. After the bullets in the board and the 12 men who had sat on a concrete floor to keep a dog company while she was unconscious, strength was not the absence of damage. It never had been. It was the decision made again and again in the face of every reason not to stand up in the room and do the work with whatever body you had, whatever tools remained, whatever dog was pressed against your left side telling you the truth when everything else was noise. She had walked 17 steps today. She would walk more tomorrow. Rex would be there for every one of them. That was not sentiment. That was not metaphor. That was the specific, concrete, unbreakable fact of what loyalty looks like when it is real. And real loyalty, Lena Cross had learned in 2.5 years, in 3 days, in one corridor, that changed everything, does not require permission, does not require recognition, and does not stop. It simply stays. And that, in the end, is the only kind of strength that matters.